40 years ago today. Um, Hello, everyone. My dad actually did that to me this morning. He's been joking about that's a reference for anybody who didn't catch it. That's a reference to City Slickers. When Billy Crystal's mom calls and leaves a message on his machine, it says 40 years ago today. And he's been jokingly saying that for pretty much all my life, and here we are. He was able to say it for real today. It's my birthday, everyone, and thank you, everyone who's here. And great to see you, Steph.
Hey,
Thank you,
Steph.
Stephanie.
Hey,
Uh,
Steph.
Aaron, I know you said you can't stay, but I won't take that personally. That's okay. You gotta make priorities, I guess. I love you. Yeah, thanks guys for stopping in, and yeah, tonight is gonna be. I think we're gonna do tonight a little different. As our topic for tonight is the movie Goldeneye, but I decided we're also just going to, goof around and go to wherever the stream takes us, and just have fun. And also, it's not I love this movie dearly, but also it's not one of those movies that requires like a super in-depth analysis. Um, it's a lot of fun, but it's also very stylized and just a fun shoot 'em up, blow 'em up action movie. So I think it's the perfect movie to just have fun with today. But and of course that movie that I'm talking about is Goldeneye, which is my personal favorite James Bond movie. It was the first one I ever saw. It's pretty much I would say that it's not necessarily the best, especially over the past however many years. The Bond films, filmmaking wise, have certainly taken a big step up. But if you ask me what my favorite is, it's still Goldeneye. And how much of that is tied up with the N64 video game, I can't answer. But it's I think it's a generational thing. If you're my age, you grew up loving that game and loving this movie, and yeah, a whole bunch of fun. But how are you doing, Jared?
I'm doing just grand. Happy birthday, buddy.
Thank you.
As if we were going to be summing up the events that led us to this day, we would say that about 4 billion years ago, there was a big bang that brought the universe into existence. Then a bunch of other crap happened, and 40 years ago today, you came into the world. So,
Oh yeah,
there
it's
things
all
got.
it's all been leading to this.
But yeah.
What happens next in the universe? I'll let you all know. It's all very top secret. Um, yeah. Anybody who's coming to this stream today not knowing that it's just a big old birthday party, I apologize. This may not be the in-depth Goldeneye stream you were looking for, but screw it. I did want to just have a goofy time today. Oh, hi, Danny, and hi, Wheezy. Thank you, guys, for coming by. Yeah, I'm gonna say I know I'm gonna have a lot of people telling me shut up, but I am feeling the big jump forward in the progression of my age today. Yes, I'm only one day older than yesterday, but yesterday I was one day before 40. So it feels like a big day. But it is what it is. Yeah, yeah, I don't know what else to say there. Today will be a counseling session as well. But we'll talk a little bit more about James Bond to get things started off. Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that really made me smile when I started watching the movie today was that first time we get Pierce Brosnan's, the name's Bond, James Bond. It really brought me back. I think everybody remembers their first Bond, and I'll tell you guys a story about my experience with this movie, which was I was not at all interested in watching it because I was like 11 years old, and at 11 the passage of time is like everything's a crawl, and so the time between this and the last James Bond movie with Timothy Dalton might as well have been 40 years. But my parents were like super psyched about, it's the new James Bond movie. So we were all sitting in the living room watching it. And, the opening of the movie happens. I'm not involved in it yet. And Bond like rides the motorcycle off the cliff down to the plane. And I'm rolling my eyes. I'm like, how can he do that? That's stupid. And my mom was like, he's James Bond. He can do anything. So that was how we started off. But I kid you not, like not 30 minutes into the movie, both my mom and my dad are asleep on the couch, having gotten bored with the movie. Maybe, I don't know. I'm laying on the floor, just enraptured, and just totally buying into the whole thing and sold on James Bond. And it shows you that like it's a generational thing. Like every generation has their James Bond and their type of James Bond movie, I think. And this was definitely like James Bond entering the 90s. And so I think it was just the perfect movie for me at the perfect time. And I loved it. So, yeah. And then the video game came out, and I was insufferable. But yeah, I know. And the funny thing about that is that I love how it all kind of fluctuates, how they deal with the age of Bond and the history of Bond. It's like with the Daniel Craig movies, it's supposed to be starting fresh. Like this is Bond at the beginning of his time. But then we cut forward to Skyfall and he's getting the old car out. And it's like, wait, is this supposed to be the same James Bond from Connery's day? So yeah, I love the lack of sticking to any known continuity. It's what makes the whole thing fun. But what's your experience with this movie, Jared?
So I saw it on cable, just randomly. They were having one of those James Bond marathons. I think it might have been on a holiday because I seem to remember a bunch of my family members were there, including my uncle, who is a big James Bond fan. And we just kind of had it on in the background, and it was playing through a series of movies. And it started up with this one, and I do vividly remember the plane sequence in the opening act catching my eye, where he dove off the cliff, and I'm like, oh, they're not going to do it, are they? They're not going to have him manage to fly right into the door of the plane. I'm like, yes, that is exactly what they're going to do. And that kind of gave me the vibe that I needed to know for the movie. But I do enjoy this movie a great deal. Of the Pierce Brosnan, the four Pierce Brosnan movies, this one is probably the one that sticks out the most in my mind. Although I do have an enduring soft spot as well for I believe it's for Tomorrow Never Dies, because of the great Jonathan Pryce villain performance as well. But I will admit that like I've not been a consummate James Bond fan. Like I have not seen every single Bond movie. I'm familiar with all the eras, from Connery to Lazenby to Moore to Dalton to Brosnan. I will say that I really did start to get more invested in the continuity of the James Bond legacy with the recent Daniel Craig run, which did pay at least more homage to continuity within its specific set of movies. Although at the start of that particular era, it's pretty clearly a reboot because it starts off with Bond, of course, getting his license to kill. But continuity is boring in a franchise like this. It really is much more about the adventure and the fun, and the gadgets and the espionage and the exotic locations and the colorful characters and the Bond girls and Bond himself, and it can be fun. So I came prepared with a long page of notes about James Bond possibly being a relic of the Cold War era and what is his place in modern society. And then I took that page of notes and I crumpled it and I threw it away. And I'm like, let's just have fun. This movie is a great time.
Well, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This is not the stream where I have to be, looking towards the future and how, it's, and I will say right off the bat, it is a good thing that things change, we evolve. But you know what? For today, when I was watching this movie, I was like, no, I'm an 11-year-old again. And, Bond is blowing shit up. And, he's killing the bad guys and he gets the girl. And, just allow me for the duration of the runtime of this movie to just be a kid again, and then I can worry about Bond catching up with the times, at another time, when the new movies come out. I will say I think that for me Bond was always, Bond soars for me when it's allowed to be a little bit goofy. I love, and like I said, I do love the Daniel Craig movies, but I won't lie, the stronger points of those movies for me are always when they're allowed to lean into the history of Bond and sort of, like I just said in Skyfall, when it's been very serious, and then him and Emma are on the run and turn on the lights in the garage, and you see the car, and the classic music kicks in, and and it's like that's for me when I smile, and that's why I liked going back to this movie today, because it just felt like a return to that childhood glee of the first time I experienced Bond. And what's fun about this one is where it tries to and not just tries, it succeeds. Like the music for the most part is composed by the musician Eric Serra, and it's a very different Bond score. It's very like techno driven and Bond for a new era, but they knew when to crank up classic Bond, and when the whole ride through St. Petersburg with the tank kicks in, it's like, nope, this is when it needs to be the old-fashioned Bond music turned up to 11. and I just love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, let's. By the way, guys, if throughout this, I promised, when I was advertising the stream today, that this is, part movie discussion, part birthday party, part AMA. You guys pretty much know everything about me, but if you want to throw some questions out at me, either to find something out or just to embarrass me, do so, and we'll mix things up a bit. I will say, like, one thing that this movie has, that, well, it has a lot of things, but I think this movie has some of the best Bond girls. out of the franchise. I don't think I could appreciate when I was a kid, how glorious the name Xenia Onatopp. But I could very much appreciate what an impact Famke Janssen was having on me before she was Jean Grey. And for me, this is the role I remember, of her, for very good reason. And then of course it has like the best, bar none, the best James Bond villain in my opinion. In Alec Trevelyan 006. This was the first time I ever saw Sean Bean, and like I was a major fan from this point on, to the point where when he was cast in The Lord of the Rings, I was like, oh, it's 006. You were describing when you saw this on TV. What age were you, John?
I probably was in my teenage years. It would have been like probably the early 2000s, maybe 2003, 2004. So I would have been 14 or 15. And I remember that specifically because I knew, like, I had seen the X-Men films, or at least the first two, before I saw this movie. And so I very much knew Famke Janssen as Jean Grey and not as Xenia Onatopp.
Well, it's so funny because I imagine that it's quite like, in either case, it's a huge reversal. Because obviously this is the first thing that I saw her in, so when she was cast as Jean Grey, I was like, Jean Grey, but Jean Grey is so nice. But no, I'm just gonna say it bluntly. This hit me at the right age where I was like, I'm supposed to be scared of her, and I kind of am, but also I'm feeling something else. And if evil, why hot? So.
Yep, very, very much true here, and also Sean Bean. I had definitely seen the Lord of the Rings films before I saw this movie, and I was like, "Oh, Boromir's in this movie. Oh, he's a bad dude." But also this was before Game of Thrones, of course. So this was before I was really aware of the whole Sean Bean dies in every movie idea, but I will say that in that front, this is one of the best Sean Bean death scenes. I mean, nothing's ever topping Boromir's death for its emotion and its, how beautifully it's done. But in terms of just like great death scenes, Trevelyan gets a pretty damn good one.
Oh yeah, she counts as a Bond girl. In my book, because pretty much, all the movies, at least all the classic films, had like the good Bond girl and the evil Bond girl. And not all of them, but a lot of them did. And so yeah, she definitely. Well, what I love most is that Xenia doesn't even have any kind of character arc whatsoever. She's just the evil, twisted, hot woman. But she plays it so well, she's clearly just having the best time of her life. Yeah, I'll go ahead and put this up for you guys. No, I will say, I remember that, I just described that my parents had fallen asleep. I was very happy when we got to this scene that they were still asleep. But yeah, it had an effect on me. What can I say? All right, story, John. Let's talk story. No, it's like the whole 006 thing I thought was just so amazing, because I stand by what I said. I think he's the best. He's definitely my favorite Bond villain, and because there's such a personal component to, to the rivalry, between those two characters, and like he's got such a great, like he's got two awesome entrances, which is right off the bat in the beginning, but then when he comes back, the big reveal, when he's like, "Hello, James," and then he steps out of the shadow. It's so good. And yeah, I know, right? No, but he's got a whole big, great speech in that scene, and I just remember, like, and this is before Sean Bean was even like, he wasn't yet the Sean Bean that like we would all know and love from everything fantasy that you love. It's like, but he was just killing it with his speeches and all the dialogue and stuff. So I just remember, and it's funny because somebody earlier in the chat said that it's unusual that he was playing a villain here, but the thing is, even though he's this character that you love in Lord of the Rings, in the book, the character Boromir is very antagonistic in the book, and he's not quite as lovable as how Sean Bean makes him in the film. And so, actually, when he was cast as Boromir, I was in the middle of reading the book. Actually, I think when I found out that he was playing Boromir, and I was like, "No, that fits." Because Boromir is an asshole. And and then I think the death scene at the end of Fellowship, or actually it's at the beginning of Two Towers in the books, led me to believe, well, no, this could actually be a really bit of a different role for him. But then when I saw the movie, he just like took it to a whole new level, and then all of a sudden Boromir becomes everybody's favorite character. So and I always say, like, that's whatever you feel about the movies, and you should love them unconditionally. But whatever you feel about them, Boromir is like the one thing that everybody has to agree that they just made that so much better than what's in the book. So, the hell you say?
It's the ring's corrupting influence playing on his pride. That's what it is. He is very much a tragic figure, and I think that we can forgive him because of he ultimately is a good man who shows that at the end before he dies in one of the most heartbreaking and just best movie scenes ever committed to film. Yeah. So I am I'm all in on Boromir being one of my favorite characters in both book and movie adaptations. But I do agree that Sean Bean brought a particular depth to the role that elevated him in my eyes. And he brings a similar depth to Trevelyan here. He basically, I mean, it's not the same because in this case he is very much a villainous character, and the fact that he has a tortured backstory and a tortured history with his, MI6 and England and how it relates to his family, I would say that he doesn't, use it as an opportunity for self-reflection. He's very much just like, yeah, I'm gonna burn down the world, and I'm gonna burn down everyone who ever hurt me and hurt my family and hurt, and it all goes back to the history of this was the first time I heard the term Lien's Cossack, because they say it a lot in this movie. But it actually is a fascinating history there, and you can see how that would be a great backstory for a Bond villain.
This is the first time that I was actually paying attention to like the historical,
Yeah.
you know, the context of all that, and I'm like, yeah, they were victims, but they aren't really good either.
No, no, they
uh,
like. I mean, when you read up on what some of them, did, it's like it's terrible, but it's also terrible what happened to them.
yeah,
So it's it's kind of one of those scars of history kind of things where there's you can see where everyone's coming from, but ultimately what's important is what you choose to do with that. And in this case, what Trevelyan chooses to do with that, he's like, I'm going to take a super evil Russian satellite and use it to send London back to the Stone Age while I get rich. And that is pretty not morally good. Even though,
I did like, again, this is like when I was younger, I was not really paying attention to, what the evil plan was. It was just like, that's the bad guy. Bond's
yeah,
gonna go kill him. But I was watching it, I was like, wow, so they're really just breaking into the world's bank and, and then just, you know, blowing shit up to cover to
you know,
cover their tracks. But then he explains the plan a bit more, and there's a bit more to it that's quite nefarious. But I do like that Bond's like, at the end of the day, you're just a bank robber.
yeah. The Bond villains tend to specialize in the Rube Goldberg theory of contraptions and plots. They have very complicated plots using very complicated, machines and technology to accomplish what's usually a pretty simple goal, whether that's to enrich themselves or to take over the world or to get revenge on 007 or somebody close to him. So it's all in service of the spectacle itself. So tend to find it very amusing, and I tend to find it very much more fun when they have these big complicated plots and they don't bother to go into the details about why it's that complicated. And also, like, every Bond movie has to have the Q scene where he's explaining all the gadgets and stuff, but and you don't need to know like how or why this stuff works. You're just knowing like this is the new toy, and that holds true for the villains too. Like, one of my absolute favorite little beats from No Time to Die, which is the most recent Bond movie with Daniel Craig. The plot involves nanobots that pass from people to people and then can infect people based on their DNA. And one of my favorite beats is when they're I think it's the character who plays Tanner, Rory Kinnear, like they're explaining, they're like, they're nanobots, and he's just like, right. He just carries on with the briefing because it's like, this for him, this is Tuesday, and for Bond, this is Monday, Sunday. It's an every day of the week kind of thing where he goes and he's going to get his exploding pen, and he's going to get his belt that has 75 feet of cable wire, and he's going to have his Walther PPK and his Aston Martin that has missiles behind the headlights, and he's going to go for it. So it's this movie very much is like a Rosetta Stone of everything that makes Bond Bond. It's very cool.
Yeah, I really did leap for joy when it got to the Q scene, and I was so loving the ridiculousness of everything that that he was being shown, and I'm like, I really want to get back to this. I want to get back to the crazy gadgets, because those were toned down quite a bit in the Daniel Craig movies, and one of the parts that really rankles me, but I think it's intended to, is just when the young Q says, "What were you expecting? An exploding pen? We
Well,
don't really
yes.
go in for that anymore." And I'm like, yes, that's what I want. God damn it, give it to me. Oh, but everything comes back around. We'll get back there someday. And then of course the finishing beat of of the Q scene is where he grabs, of course, the sandwich and he says, "Don't touch that! It's my lunch." Oh God! And
but was it only his lunch? It could have had another purpose.
yes. And the great Q, still at this point, played by Desmond Llewellyn, and there will never be another like him, just, and I know they brought in for a couple of movies, John Cleese, who was his successor, but then they just kind of, started over from ground zero and brought, oh God, I can't remember the actor's name in the Daniel Craig films.
It's Ben Whishaw. It's Ben Whishaw.
Ben Whishaw. And he's a phenomenal actor. And for people who haven't seen him in other things, I know he was. I know the movie had a bit of mixed reception, but he was in Cloud Atlas, and he was like so phenomenal in that. And he's been in a number of other things. And so yeah, when I saw the USQ, I was like, oh, that's great. I really hope that they keep that they carry him over for the next films.
Yeah, and they may do it because, as you noted with the actor playing Q, and like the Bond franchise has a tendency to, again, they cast the actors they want to cast, and they'll carry them over because famously, for instance, Judi Dench was a staple as M in the Daniel Craig Bond movies. She's introduced in this movie, and it's her first Bond movie, but then she just carries on through, and then when there's a brand new Bond, she's still there, and now she's the old, veteran who's welcoming in the new Bond, as opposed to in this movie, Bond's been there for a while, and she's the new M.
As we see, what's continuity?
Yeah.
It's the Bond movies give the X-Men films a run for their money, as far as continuity goes. But no, I love it. I forgot how little she's in this one.
Oh yeah, she only has like 2 scenes.
Yeah.
2 good scenes. Judi Dench is going to crush any scene that she's in. But like I remember, maybe it's just because I remember her looming so large in the Daniel Craig era Bonds that when she showed up, I'm like, oh yeah, this is her first movie, and then I'm like, oh yeah, she's not in this very much at all. She just kind of, once Bond goes out on his mission, I don't know if we get another scene with her, honestly.
We don't, and I think it's pretty similar in Tomorrow Never Dies. She has more to do in The World Is Not Enough, because in that one, I think she's taken hostage at some point, and I'm sure that was like, I'm sure the feeling was, we have Judi Dench in these movies, we have to give her more to do, and once they did the Daniel Craig movies, I think they were really able to figure out how to bring her into the story, and then. With Skyfall, God, she's got so much to do, and she knocks it out of the park. But no, she's one of my favorite parts of this era of Bond. I really, especially, again, this was my first Bond movie, so I kind of love that, along with the new Bond, we get this new M, and as well as a new Moneypenny, and Q was the only one who had carried over from the old films, and that was cool when I got to go back and see that he was even around, in the much older films. I don't think he was in Dr. No, but he was in. I think he was in subsequent Sean Connery movies. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, I'm looking back at his filmography, and it looks like From Russia with Love was his first one, and then he basically carried all the way through until The World Is Not Enough. So, but yeah, it's a delight to and that's the kind of element where it's more like just a constant rather than a canonical through line, because every James Bond movie has the certain beats that it's going to hit, and in some franchises that might get frustrating when you're like, oh, they're doing this again within the Bond movies. You're like, no, every single Bond movie he's going to need to go check in with his gadget guy, and it's better when that's Q, because like my personal favorite Bond movie is actually the first Daniel Craig Bond movie, Casino Royale. I just love it so much, and it's also directed by Martin Campbell. But that movie famously actually does not have Q, and I kind of missed Q in that one.
Yeah, I will say for a long time, I thought that Skyfall was my favorite of the Daniel Craig movies, but as more time has passed, I think it's Casino Royale. Because for me, yes, it kind of brought Bond down to like it took away a lot of the elements and brought him down to like that starting level, and it had a bit of grittiness to it, but it also still engaged with the old-fashioned fun of Bond. And they were still letting David Arnold score the films. And in my opinion, like after John Barry, who did like the classic Bond scores, David Arnold is the very best after him. And like for me, you need that flavor of that classic Bond music. And I didn't like that the later films started to move away from that. So yeah, I don't know. I love the music in that film, because even though they don't reprise the like main James Bond theme until the very, very, very end of the movie, the rest of the music still feels like James Bond music. You know, it's orchestrated in that same way. But by the way, everybody who's in the chat, like, let us know what your favorite Bond movie is. I'm interested to get a pulse on, you know, on where everybody sits. Maybe we'll get a lot of Daniel Craig answers, but I'd be interested if anybody like, because I don't know. For me, a lot of the best Bond movies are still back in the Sean Connery era.
Yeah.
You know,
And,
like especially Goldfinger, you know.
Yeah, I would say From Russia with Love and Goldfinger are like hard to argue with as like top tier Bond. Although another one that Sky, yeah, and Eric, nice to see you in the chat, buddy. I know you were very excited to talk about this one, so good to have you here. But yeah, in terms of like older Bond movies, another one that I will always go to bat for is The Forgotten Bond, Mr. George Lazenby and on Her Majesty's Secret Service, just because Dame Diana Rigg, man. She's so good in that movie, and it's one of the more, before the Daniel Craig era, you know, that's one of the movies that had the most like emotional heft to it. So I always loved that one as well. Even though Lazenby himself only got the one Bond movie, and he's not Connery. He's not. He himself is not usually held up as like one of the best Bonds, but I do love the movie he appears in. So.
Oh, I know what your answer is then. No, and it's a great one. I would say that aside from, you know, they both have gold in the title, but aside from Goldeneye, the Bond movie that I've probably seen the most times is probably Goldfinger, just because it is that classic, you know, Bond. Yeah, no, and even though I said I have a lot of fondness for Tomorrow Never Dies as well, but Goldeneye is like clearly the top tier of the Brosnan films. And I kind of have a soft spot for The World Is Not Enough too. Obviously, it's got some flaws, but it's like some of us, you know, I get like the people who come to the the newer Bond films first, and they look back and all that stuff is very cheesy. But yes, we had Denise Richards as a nuclear scientist. And as ridiculous as that sounds to you, yes, it was ridiculous to us back in the late 90s, but it was a Bond movie, so you just take it. But no, my favorite line from that movie is when, and we'll talk about him in this film too. It's with Zakovsky when he's going back into his office on the docks, and the world is not enough. And, he's like had a really bad day, you can tell. And Bond, and Denise Richards and her character and Bond are waiting for him in there. And, Bond just slams the door shut. And Zakovsky goes, can't you just say hello like a normal person? And I just love it. And he's so great in this one too. It's, in the years before he was Hagrid,
Yeah.
Which
I have to admit,
great Robbie Coltrane.
Yeah, I have to admit, the first time I saw, I didn't recognize him at all, and it was only on recent viewings where I was like, oh my God, that is Robbie Coltrane. It is Hagrid. Which, it makes sense, if you think about the staple British film franchises, there's Doctor Who, there's James Bond, and there's Harry Potter, and then there's also Star Wars with, like, the Imperial Officers. So, like, odds are there's, a favorite actor you've seen in one franchise, they probably appeared in one of the other big ones as well. So and Game of Thrones to that list too.
Guilty, you're not alone. A shoe? Who throws a shoe? Honestly. So great. No, speaking of Odd Job, like the video game, and when
perfect segue,
able to play as all these fast Bond villains, including Odd Job, Jaws, it was great. Hold on, let's see. Oh, that you're talking about the original Casino.
Oh yeah.
I have not seen that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's one of the two Bond films that is considered non-canon in this very canon adherent franchise. With the famous David Nevin as Bond in that movie, also known as from the Pink Panther. So.
Hello, Dean Madden. Is this a friend of yours, Jared, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
He had actually reached out to me and on Twitter about Star Wars stuff, and I had mentioned I'd also recommended the movie Past Lives, and he said he watched it on the plane and really loved it, and he asked if I'd ever talked about movies anywhere else, and I said I actually do appear on my friend John Webster's channel, and we have a weekly conversation every Sunday, so feel free to stop by. Glad you're here, Dean.
Yeah, it is great to have you. Yes, and talk movies we do. Yeah, no, it's I know a lot of people will say, some of Daniel Craig's films are the best, and I can't really argue, because I think that the films have definitely in filmmaking quality, I think have taken a leap up with those films, but it's also a question of what you're looking for in your Bond movies as well, because sometimes you just want cheesy fun. And it's funny. I find that as I'm getting older, I've gone back towards wanting that sort of childhood fun of, and not taking Bond too seriously. It's kind of a similar journey that I've taken with the Batman films as well, where I definitely went through a phase where I was, if you asked me what the best Batman movie was, I was going to say, oh, it's The Dark Knight. It's like taken Batman to new heights, and now I've kind of gone back towards the Tim Burton films just because it was such a part of my youth, and I kind of love Batman having one foot in the dark and moody, but also another foot in the cheesy and campy. So. Yeah, no, my personal favorite is Batman Returns, but it's like either one, for me, Tim Burton's like Batman is just such a unique creation. And I give some people headaches when I say that. To me, Tim Burton's Batman is Batman. And they'll be like, no, because they take such exception to that.
Yeah, it's going to be different for everybody. Like, we had just had our conversation last week about Batman Mask of the Phantasm, and we talked about the different eras that we came to Batman. I'm more of a Christopher Nolan era Batman guy, so Christian Bale's always going to be up there. I love what Robert Pattinson did. I love what Ben Affleck did. I love what Michael Keaton did. But I think where John and I find, our clear Venn diagram is we're both on like Kevin Conroy is number one and will never be dislodged. So but that's it's everyone has different taste, and we talked about that a lot.
Well, and just like what we've been talking about with Bond, it's like a lot of this comes down to like how were you first exposed to the thing that you love, and it's because for me growing up, I had seen the Adam West TV show, but the Tim Burton films were definitely where I like, I was starting to grow up a little bit. And by the way, I will say that when I was young enough to be watching, the 60s show, I did not realize it was a comedy. Because at that age, I was like, no, this is serious. So, but yeah, so it's, and my dad, his first Bond was Roger Moore. So, or I don't know if it was his very first, but like that was the main Bond, like during his generation, at the time when he was growing up. So for him, that's his favorite, and for me, since this was Pierce Brosnan was my first Bond, like he's always going to be James Bond for me. And he does seem like a man who was born to play James Bond.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, and even though like I talked about how like I really got into caring much more about Bond with the Daniel Craig run, the first time I became aware of Bond was during this era when Pierce Brosnan was playing the role. So whenever I think James Bond, I always thought Pierce Brosnan. That's what he looks like. And obviously I do now consider like Sean Connery to have the original interpretation of the character, but it's that it hasn't changed that I still very much think of Pierce Brosnan as like the prototypical James Bond style. And it's because when I first started to become aware of movies in this era, he was everywhere. And because this movie had just come out, and it was he did 4 Bond movies, and like his run as Bond was actually not that long. It was only like it was less than a decade, but he really made his mark in that era, and he's still so associated with the role whenever he crops up in something else. So yeah.
Yeah, guilty. You may be right, because I was going to say, well, the Bond films got serious with the Daniel Craig movies, but that's not what you're talking about. Self-awareness is a different thing. This movie is very much, aware of all the, goofiness of its history, and and is kind of winking at that. Casino Royale has a little bit of that with the shaken or stirred. Do I look like I give a damn? But I really like, another moment in the scene with Zakowski when he goes in there and Zakowski says vodka martini, shaken or not stirred. And they have, you know, uh, and they have a laugh about that, and yeah, it's and then the part where M is like, I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, relic of the Cold War, and so yeah, it is very like self-aware of itself.
And these things tend to go in waves, like very famously the Roger Moore era as the longest tenured Bond with 8 films. Like they got very campy, literally like going to the moon and all this stuff. And then there was kind of a shift away from that with the 2 Timothy Dalton Bond movies, which are considered to be a little bit darker in tone, and I do think they've enjoyed a bit of a renaissance in these days with people liking his take on Bond more. But at the time, like License to Kill was considered a very dark Bond outing, and when the role passed to Pierce Brosnan, I think they wanted to get more back to like let's settle back into the fun of it all a little bit more, while still telling a more serious dramatic story in parts. So I think the franchise very much is self-aware in that way, because of course then it probably got a little bit too campy with Die Another Day, Pierce Brosnan's last franchise. And then, of course, Casino Royale came out in 2006, the year around the same time that Christopher Nolan was starting to make his Batman movies. And there was very much in vogue to do more like hard-edged take on these kind of heroes. So that's part of where the whole shaken not stirred, do I give a damn kind of came from. And I did appreciate that, even though I love Casino Royale, as I said, it's my favorite Bond movie, I did appreciate that as the franchise went on with Craig era, they started to get back more into like, okay, now we can start to be a little bit more with the funny gadgets. Let's get Q back in there, and have a bit more of the Bond flavor. Because I do think that at the start of the Craig era, it was much more harder edged, particularly with Quantum of Solace, which is very bleak at times.
That's funny, because I actually, looking back, I feel like Casino Royale is actually the most, like, even though it's a stripped down version of the character, to me that movie feels most like classic Bond out of the Daniel Craig films, because it's, especially the fact that so much of it is characters sitting down for a card game, and that feels so very classic Bond. And for me, the style of the later films actually went further away from that, and to the point where I feel like Die Another Day feels like a very bleak Bond entry. And so but I see what you mean, because they did start to allow some of the trappings back in, but tonally I feel like they've moved a bit further away from classic Bond. And so I'm wondering, I feel like we're not quite out of this serious era yet, and I feel like the next films are still going to be in that, operating in that landscape. And I do wonder when we're going to come back around to, okay, let's have some fun with Bond again.
Yeah, and I definitely take your point about Casino Royale and that era being more in the classic Bond trappings. I think it's, for me, what's most evocative about that movie is the love story between Bond and Vesper Lynd. Mm-hmm. So, and that is something that is, usually the Bond girls are, they're famously, most of them are one and done. But Vesper lingers throughout the entirety of Craig's run. So I think that's why it kind of takes on a heavier aura for me. But I also think that part of it is that you know, someone mentioned Austin Powers earlier. It's like that around the same time as the Pierce Brosnan movies were going around. This is when the Bond spoof was in full effect.
So I think Austin Powers did just as much to damage Bond as Die Another Day did. Because how could you take that seriously? And so and I love the Austin Powers movies. You know, I think they're great.
And I think that they're excellent, you know, pieces of like satire while also being entertaining movies in and of themselves. But you know, because Bond is such part of our cultural iconography at this point, like it's now these like British like knockoff Bond franchises are very much a dime a dozen, and like, you know, the Kingsman franchise is pretty much in the same vein of like spoofing on the Bond tropes. And I do think that for Bond to stay Bond, they kind of feel like they need to lean into their history a little bit more, which makes me, and like the gravity of like, no, we are the original. This is James Bond. All of you are imitating us. So I do think that that's probably going to mean that they're going to stay more with the like more grounded, serious tone of it in the next iteration, whenever we get our announcement of the new Bond. But I do hope that, as you say, they go back to having at least a little bit more just open fun with it. And, you know, because the Craig Bond movies did get quite dark, you know, and and spoiler alert for a 3-year-old movie, at the end of No Time to Die, Bond dies for the first time ever, or at least
I still don't know how I feel about that. You know,
and I mean, and I love the end of No Time to Die. That movie made me cry. It was one of my favorite movies of 2021. But I do think that was kind of a clean break for them to like be able to like, okay, now we can go and do something a little bit different.
I did ask myself at the end of that, though. I'm like, because I get what you're saying. It is a very emotional ending, but I was like, do I want to be crying at the end of a James Bond movie? And so you just start to ask yourself, like, what is it that I want these movies to be? And for a taste of, and for to go in a different path, like that's fine. But I kind of wish we were, you know, that it was a pendulum that was now going to swing back the other way. But I don't think we're there yet. And I say that as someone who loves to cry at the end of movies. But it's like, but sometimes it's, you know, it just depends on what it is you're watching. And I think No Time to Die was a great movie, but I can say that I've only seen it once. And I find that interesting for a James Bond movie that I know I enjoyed. I thought was, you know, that the filmmaking was really strong, but I haven't gone back to watch it, and that's a rare thing for like a Bond movie, because usually even the Bond movies that I'm not that crazy about, I'm good for a couple of rewatches because they're fun, you know. And but No Time to Die just ended on such a downer. I'm like, oh, do I want to go through that again? But well, you know, everybody cried at that.
You know, everyone deserves their happy ending, and you know, Bond, alas, did not get his in with Léa Seydoux, which would make me cry too. So I think that it's probably for the fun of you know, trying to get onto the next era of whatever Bond will be. You know, it'll depend a lot on the creative director, the director that they choose to find for it, for the actor they choose to cast. And, you know, it is kind of a trust at this point. Like, I don't think Bond is going to break the mold too much, but, you know, we do want to, like, with the opportunity for a fresh start, maybe they will, like, lean back more into the roots. And I do think that, like, tying it back to this movie, like, Goldeneye was a great way to kind of like start off the Brosnan era, because it was a very much like just a bold statement of like, okay, the movies are going to be like this now. We're gonna open up with a classic, you know, action sequence, and then he's gonna jump off a cliff and dive into the plane, and you know, manage to pull it out of the nose dive, and then we're off to the races. So it really just, it doesn't stop to like reflect on the legacy of Bond. It's just like, here we go, and I do think that that'll be.
Dan, I touched on it a little bit, but Jared didn't look like he was going to help me out, and I was just sitting here blushing.
I just want to be careful about what we say about Xenia Onatopp, because you know, she is ultimately a, not to rain on anyone's fun, but she is a sadistic lust murderer. So I'm not gonna go too gaga over her. But yeah, Famke Janssen plays her wonderfully. She has a ball with the role.
No, I will absolutely go gaga over her, because, like I said, I was a very impressionable 11 years old when this movie came out, and yeah, she was definitely something new that I hadn't seen before. She definitely does.
She did not skip leg day. The opposite, in fact.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I don't have words. I really don't. What a way to go. But I guess that's all I'll say.
Yeah. No, I mean that, like, poor poor British admiral, like, you know, he thought it was his lucky day, and it was not.
It was not, but he looked happy and deaf. Big old grin on his face. Yeah, I don't know. I have nothing else to say.
Yeah. I do remember when she you know, when she has her death scene, and you know, I remembered it being very like sudden, and when I watched it last night, I was like, oh yeah, like I thought that she lasted longer, but she did, you know, the pleasure was not all hers in the
end. Yeah.
She and I will say, Xenia Onatopp, all-time great character name, and I love in particular that speaking about how like self-aware this movie seems to be at times, the movie itself like knows how ridiculous the name is, and they seem to be like hesitant to lean into it at times, where like when she introduces herself and she's like, Xenia Onatopp, and Bond's like, Onatopp? And that's all he says. Like yeah.
And then later on he says the woman Onatopp.
Yeah, he like, even James Bond is struggling with that, and then of course there is probably the single corniest moment that the movie leans into when Moneypenny is giving him the briefing over online, and she's like, good night, James. I trust you'll say on the top of things, and you're just like, grown so hard, but also well played.
And then the strategic cut to the first sex scene of the movie, or squeeze scene of the movie, whatever we're calling it.
Yeah, I do think it's probably an alias of some kind, but I like that the movie doesn't lean into that, you know, because otherwise, as he joked to Vesper in Casino Royale, I do hope you gave your parents help.
Oh God, yeah. There's really no way to dwell on this particular topic without me continuing to turn red. Yeah, it's. Like I said, there were lots of complicated feelings. I instantly fell in love with Famke Janssen, but I was also really, really afraid of her. And that can do things to an 11-year-old. So, okay, there we go.
Just as long as we're all morally clear that she's a bad lady and what she does is bad, then we can also appreciate what an enjoyable romp this movie can also be.
I mean, that's all the more reason. Okay, I'm gonna move on from that. All right. Oh, thank you so much, Dan, for bringing this up again. Okay. Let's take a break. Let's go into the middle. Yeah, Nessie, you just came in right on time to see me blush talking about Xenia. Um, yeah, it's forever going to be my big regret that what happened with X3. I especially now, with us getting the return of the animated series. I keep thinking of how the Phoenix Saga was done for the original show, and I'm like, oh God, if only we could have gotten that, on the big screen. And even when they tried to do something more along that line with the younger cast in Dark Phoenix, they still didn't. They didn't go all in, and and I I don't know. There were just some issues with it. You'll never get it the way that the animated series did it, and you know. It's, anybody wants to see a great version of the Phoenix Saga, just go back and watch the animated series because that's like the best version of all that. But yeah, it would have been great to get to see the original cast tackle that story the way it should have been. But yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, so let's good. That got me out of blushing a little bit. Let's go into the mid roll. So next week we are talking about we're doing our mid-season stream on the Bad Batch. We'll be covering, I think it's episodes 4 through 11. Am I right about that, Jared?
Yeah, so there have been 9 episodes of season 3 of The Bad Batch as of this past Wednesday, and then this coming Wednesday we've got a 2-parter. So that'll take us through episode 11, and then we'll have our it's more of a 2/3 season check-in or a 3/4 season check-in, but a check-in where we cover basically everything that's happened since we talked about the first 3 episodes, the season 3 premiere a couple weeks back. And then there will be 4 episodes left after that, and we'll be gearing up for the home stretch. And from what I've heard, based on people who have seemed to have seen everything except the finale, we're in for some dark stuff. But I trust these writers and these directors and this cast so implicitly that I'm just ready to go on whatever ride they have for us, while also preparing myself for pain.
I'm not prepared for the fact that we've really only got like 6 episodes left. Because it feels like the end has just kind of snuck up on us. And this season thus far has kind of gone by in a flash. I'm glad we decided to break up our streams the way we did, because I feel like even though we had a very strong episode this past week, I feel like going into our next discussion with this 2-parter coming up will be, a good way to go. And then the week after that, we are going to be swinging back to, our queen, Miss Keira Knightley. We're doing a stream on Atonement, which has been on our list for quite some time. And we're going to see if we can get a guest for that. I think First Refusal will definitely go to AR, as she's our partner in crime for all things Keira Knightley. And then the week after that, we're actually revisiting a film that's already been covered on this channel, but not with you, Jared. And it's one of your favorite films. We're going to be talking about Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, which, yeah, you did not have to twist my arm to talk about that one again, because that is also one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
so
it's great stuff coming up. I'm so excited to talk about The Bad Batch. Atonement is a film that it's like when we talk about how much we adore Keira Knightley, like Atonement is like a top tier film on that for us. You know, Pride and Prejudice 2005 will always be the top, but Atonement is a beautiful movie. It's a complicated movie in some respects. You know, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it does deal with some very tricky and dark subject matter. And yes, as Eric points out, it's not the happiest film in the world, but it's such an extraordinary movie.
Well, it's funny because every time I rewatch the movie, I'm like, oh, Kira in the green dress. You know, looking so lovely, giving a great performance, and I'm like, oh, that's right. I'm going to be suffering with tears and lots of sadness as I watch this. But yeah, when that came out, it was a very quick 1-2 punch of Pride and Prejudice and then Atonement, coming out within 2 years of each other, and so both of those films for me feel like, you know, the spark that lit the fire for my love of all things Keira Knightley.
Yeah.
So
and so we're very much looking forward to talking about it, and we'll hopefully have a guest on with us. But even if we don't, like, we will give that movie the respect and the due that it deserves, in terms of like talking about what we love about it, but also acknowledging the darkness of its subject matter.
Yeah, because it would be disingenuous to say that the world hasn't changed a bit since the movie was released, and things that weren't necessarily being talked about when the film came out are very much being talked about now, and so to ignore that would, you know, do a disservice to to a lot of things. So so that'll be in some respects, it'll be a difficult, difficult subject matter to tackle, but also we want to talk about our love for the film and all the wonderful, performances and the filmmaking, and so.
Yeah, and Pan's Labyrinth is that's a very dark movie, but it's one of my 5 favorite movies of all time. That's why I've been so keen to revisit it. Even though I knew John had already covered it very well on the channel, but he suggested that we revisit it, and he did not have to twist my arm. So I think that it will be a joy to, it's a beautiful, beautiful movie that deals with very heavy subject matter in an extraordinarily sensitive way, and so I can't wait to talk about that one.
Yeah, because we had that conversation about the fact that there's a lot of movies that you and I would like to talk about together that I've already done streams on, but that shouldn't hold us back from having those conversations. So, I don't think we dubbed it with an official title yet, but something, along the lines of our revisited series, where we revisit certain titles. And I have a feeling that Blade Runner 2049 will be one of those titles at some point in the future, because we both also love that movie a great deal. So, okay. Anything else you want to mention before we dive back in?
No, I mean, I'm just very much looking forward to checking back in with The Bad Batch, and I hope that some of you will join us for that. We know that show is not like quite as widely seen as some of the other things that we talk about, but it's a great show, and it's well worth your time. So please do join us if you've been following along with that show.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna shout out X-Men '97 again because you did give me time to do this last week too, Jared. But oh my God, it's so good. I did find myself wishing that this last week's episode had been a two-parter, but because so much happened in it. But then I went back to watch some episodes of the original series, and I was like, oh damn, this show moved really fast back in the day too. So I may be expecting something that even the original show wasn't delivering, but it's only because when you get around to watching the show, Jared, there's some effed up shit that happens in episode 3. That's all I'm gonna say.
But funny you should mention that, John, because I actually just this past week did watch the first episode of X-Men '97. I knew that I said that I wanted to wait until I'd revisited more of the series, but the original series, that is. But after I had watched the original pilot episodes of the show, I was like, I got distracted by other stuff, and I'm like, when am I actually gonna have time to watch 5 seasons of this show? But I was still holding off, and then finally, after this week's episode air, I happened to be just looking for something else on the internet, and I saw an article going into an in-depth explanation of the Goblin Queen, and I clicked on it out of morbid curiosity. I was like, oh, they're doing this in this show. Okay. I probably should catch up, because this is the kind of thing that I actually do want to, be a part of the conversation on. That's a wild arc for them to adapt in their 3rd episode.
Well, this is great because we can start planning a conversation for the show now, because Dan very much wants to come on and talk about it. So.
Oh yeah, no, and we would love that, Dan. Especially because, as I freely admit, it has been ages since I saw the original X-Men animated show. I don't have the same encyclopedic knowledge of the X-Men comics, so as long as I'm caught up with the original with 97, I would be happy to take a back seat and let you and John take a full-on deep geeky dive on it and just chime in whenever a thought arose.
Yeah, I will just say again, I think I initially struggled with this week's episode, but I've gone back to watch it a couple times, and I think what it is, and it deals with some of the stuff you were just talking about, but it's so effed up because what it means for even the last couple seasons of the original series is just so it's just a mind F. And then the ramifications for what lies ahead, I'm like, shit. And it's 3 episodes into this new series, and they're already doing shit like that. And I'm like, oh God. So yeah, I can't wait to talk about that. That's gonna be a lot of fun. And the show has been it's just so much fun to say that I'm watching, new episodes of X-Men, and the fact that the original, that the opening, of the show was so lovingly recreated, and it's the whole show is just done with so much love and attention for the OG version, and at a time when we're here today celebrating my 40th birthday, but I sit down to watch that show, and I feel like however old I was at the time. This is X-Men '97, so I would have been 13. so that makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah. No, and so we'll you and I had like planned out our schedule like for the next couple months or so, but we built some flexibility in there, and I do think that given how much you're loving the show, and with Dan so eager to jump in, like we'll find a slot for X-Men 97, even if we need to move some stuff around.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I could just keep going on and on about X-Men, but I won't. But a couple other elements of the movie that I wanted to touch on Goldeneye, because that's what we're talking about, is we didn't talk about. I'm gonna try and get her name right. Izabella Scorupco.
Yep.
I probably butchered that. As Natalya. I actually think, like, we've been all about Xenia, but I actually think Natalya is, a really good character. One of the, again, it goes back to the fact this is one of my favorite movies, so maybe that's part of why I would say she's one of my favorite Bond girls, because, but I just love how much she gives back to James, like, throughout the movie. She's not putting up with any of his shit, and I love that. On at certain moments she'll sound all all sweet with her accent, talking like, and then she'll switch modes into like screw you, dude, I'm taking care of myself, and she's very aggressive, which I just think that's great. And I love even though he's a little piece of shit, I do love the relationship between her and Boris. The great Alan Cumming, who talking about X-Men. A lot of people know him, from X2 as Nightcrawler, and he's done a number of things since then. But hold on, I was starting to go a little blurry. I forgot to fix one of my settings. There we go. Yeah, no, and it's funny. I was thinking as I was watching this, that's when it really gets revealed what a piece of shit Boris is. Like, he's all friendly, with her. Well, first of all, he turns her in, he betrays her, but then he's still all like Natalya until she hits him, and then he's like, then his ugly side really comes out, and so yeah, no, he gets what he deserves at the end. But I there's two things that I always loved about his character. One is, of course, I posted a GIF, earlier on Twitter. I'm invincible, and then his whole bit with the exploding pen. I like, ever since I saw this movie, I have imitated that, like, all throughout school when I was in classes and stuff. I would always like twirl the pen around and click 3 times. And that carries through to today. Maybe that's when people see me doing that, maybe that betrays a little obsessive compulsiveness on my part. I don't know. But no, so he's a great character. I think she's great. I love like her whole thing with when she says you're like boys with toys. It's like, and that really does sum up kind of the love that I think a lot of us who were adolescents when we saw this movie, like the love that we have for it. It's like, yes, it's boys with toys. But no, and I love that scene when her and James are being interrogated, and it's when Bond asks her, who was the insider? Was there anybody else? And she says no. And then later on, when when the other guy comes in and she's like, oh, enough. It was Oromov. He stole the weapon. And there's that slow turn that James does. He's like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, no, the best Bond girls, of course, are the ones who manage to give as good as they get with James and kind of call him on his nonsense when they need to, and that's a great example of that. And yeah, the whole boys with toys, refrain, which he then turns around when after they crash the train, and she's like, do you destroy every vehicle you get into? And he's like, standard operating procedure, boys with toys.
Although the funny thing about that scene, I will say, like this, then that's when you could tell, oh, we're still in the 90s. It's like, it's like, she's been pretty much just irritated with him up to this point. But then they escape this explosion, and she's like, oh, what is, she says, do you know how to disarm the weapon? And then all he has to say is, well, that depends on what weapon you're talking about disarming. Just, that would not pass muster in our current.
Not
and that's all she needs, and then she's just like any other Bond girl, and and she's totally into him at that point, and it's like, oh yes, we're still in that era.
Yes, we are. Although I do think that like she does get a legitimately great moment like in the climax of the movie when she is the one who manages to get into the computer system and reprogram Goldeneye to crash into the atmosphere, and then she gets to lord it over Boris because he's so confident that he can break her code, and he's like, she's a second level programmer, she works on the guidance system, and then she's just sitting there like smirking like, I've got you, buddy. And then he just slowly loses his mind when he realizes, no, she's actually beat me and he can't handle it. And then of course that's when he completely loses his cool. Before he loses his cool, literally, in the sense that he gets frozen to death by liquid nitrogen. He is not, in fact, invincible. But it is notable that she plays an active role. Bye, Eric. Thanks for stopping by, man.
Yep, thank you.
But yeah, she plays an active role in actually bringing down.
Oh yeah, she gets a lot of great moments. She does play an instrumental role in that. I'm just saying we are definitely still in the phase of it doesn't take much for the women to absolutely fall in love with James. Yeah. but there's all, and I know I don't want to catch any flack for this, but I'm gonna say, keeping in mind that we're all aware that this is a movie of the past. There is some fun in that, and looking back at the era of, oh, James always gets the girl. But of course we expect more, story wise, and character wise moving forward. But it's quaint looking back. So and we started to go into it a little bit earlier. I feel like now's a good time just talking about our experience with the video game, because one of the really fun things about watching the movie today was seeing all of these sets and locations that I remembered from the video game. Of course, in the video game, they were very pared down. You pretty much get the bones of all the sets that you see, in the movie, in the video game. But I just remember going through all these and, scenes in the movie that last for a minute, and they're a whole level in the video game. It was just so much fun. I can't even remember the number of times I've played that opening level going through the Russian base. And then going into all the different rooms and stuff. How much did you play this video game?
Very little, and it was primarily because I did not have an N64 when I was young. I was a PlayStation kid. So the only time I ever got to play Goldeneye was when I went over to a friend's house. And of course, because they had the N64 and they had practiced on GoldenEye constantly, they were great at the game, and they knew all the hiding spots, and they knew all the ways to, to hunt you down and snipe you from around the distant corners. So sadly, my enduring memory of the video game during this era was just how bad I was at it. But I still did have fun playing, and I always, basically took it on the, I anytime I did manage to, manage to get my gun out and defeat one of my friends in the multiplayer game, even if they had killed me like 20 times in a row, I took that as just such a massive victory. Although I never resorted to playing with Oddjob. They even were like, "You can play with Oddjob," and I'm like, "No, I refuse. give me Baron Samedi. Let's go."
One of my favorite memories of from when I was playing this game, because I used to play with my friend Tim like all the time. And sometimes we'd be playing multiplayer, and sometimes we'd just be going through the levels and taking turns. But I remember he was over at the house one day, and it was getting close to dinner time, and my mom was cooking dinner, and I was at, I think, it was the first level. It's where you the same thing at the end of the opening scene of part one, where you go into the room with like all the gas tanks and everything, and I was planting the mines on the tanks, and Mom was like, "Dinner's ready," and I was like, "Hold on, I've got to, I can't stop now. I've got to blow up these tanks," and with like no context or anything, she was like, "Oh, heaven forbid you can't blow up tanks." It was just such a mom thing of like, I don't care what you're doing, dinner's ready. It was just one of those fond memories that I have. And, but no, I was constantly like, and again, it's when you're young, time seems to stretch on. So like that video game was probably, I was probably in my sort of addicted to playing that game stage for like, I don't know, like a year or something, but it felt like so much longer than that. It's like the GoldenEye video game was like the center of my universe for for that period of time. And yeah, so it was such a, a big cultural event between the movie and the video game.
Yeah.
And I just remember when the game for the next movie came out, and it was so inferior.
Yeah.
Because it was made by like a completely different team, and I'm like, this sucks. And part of me would like to go ahead and get, like look online and order like an N64 system and a GoldenEye cartridge and just relive those childhood memories, but then I would never leave the house again. So
yeah, it really was lightning in a bottle. And as Dean points out in the chat, like it actually is like one of its legacies is like this was an era where every single time they created a new big blockbuster movie, they would make a video game out of it. And the video games were almost universally bad. Sometimes comically so. There were a few that were, better than others, but usually it was just the company rushing out a video game to capitalize on the popularity of the movie. And GoldenEye was an exception in that it was a legitimately great video game on its own that happened to be based on the James Bond movie GoldenEye, and like complemented the movie very well, and it's actually probably helped its legacy a lot along the way. So even though I personally did not grow up like religiously playing the game, I was well aware of its impact, and I became aware of all the different mechanics that people were very familiar with because people talked about it just constantly. And so I lived vicariously through it, and I actually probably had more fun watching my friends play it because they were better at me than the game than I did actually playing it myself, where I just continued to die immediately over and over. And, except for those rare opportunities when I managed to like lure my friends into a waiting minefield or something, and I was just so proud of myself, and then I immediately would die again. So.
No, my friend Tim did that to me all the time. Like I'd be playing multiplayer with him and one of his other friends, and like they'd always like team up against me and plant mines, and and it's like that did not make for the funnest experience, but but no, it still had a good time, and yeah, I just love the video. That was like the one time in my life when I was like super into playing video games. Because okay, that's a lie. Because in the years before that, when I had Nintendo, I was very much into Mario Brothers, but I feel like everybody was. But after N64 and the Goldeneye / Mario Kart 64 era, I don't think I was really into games too much after that. So that was kind of the last hurrah for me, which is good because if with the lack of time that I seem to have nowadays, if I was still addicted to playing video games, I would never get anything done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's there that everyone has that one game that they were just completely obsessed over. And when I was younger, for me, that was, again, being a PlayStation kid, it was Madden and the Spyro the Dragon series. And then when I was older, it was Dynasty Warriors, and then it was the Batman Arkham games, which I still play to this day. But Goldeneye is rightly held up as one of the greatest video games ever for a reason, and I will always have that little bit of regret that I never got to, become the master of the 007 universe the way some of my friends did, because they will always have that feather in their cap.
Well, if we ever get together in person, I will make sure to get an N64 console and bring it so that you and I can sit down and play GoldenEye.
I don't even want to imagine how bad my already meager skills have atrophied in the 20 years since I've last played the game. But it would be fun for sure.
No, that would come second in the priority list anyway, because first on the agenda would be you and I having a Game of Thrones season 8, in-person watch party.
Yes.
Which, yes, I got it in.
It's his birthday.
Y'all have to take it.
Yep.
Hashtag season 8 is great.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Hashtag season 8 is great.
We're just totally off the rails now. See, I told you all this would happen.
Yeah, we're having fun.
Yeah, no, that's why I said if you came here for a truly in-depth, discussion about the movie, this was not the stream for it, because but no, yeah, I don't know. What do you want to talk about now?
Well, I don't know if she's still in the chat, but a while back, Stephanie had put up this question. I'm sure you've answered it before.
Oh, wow!
What is your all-time favorite movie?
When was okay? All right, that wasn't too far up. I thought that was like way far up, and I was like, oh my god, did I totally just blank on that? So unfortunately, I'm going to be really predictable here and say that it is The Lord of the Rings. Like, nothing's ever going to top that for me. But if I take that out of the equation, it probably is. See, and I'm trying to like balance between, like, she's asking me all-time favorite movie, and I'm trying to balance that with like favorite and best. I would probably give it to Amadeus, you know, for a number two. Even though in recent years I've been like, why don't I just admit that Pride and Prejudice is my second favorite movie after Lord of the Rings? Because it's the one that I go on and on the most about, and I've watched it so many times. But Amadeus is such a important film for me for so many reasons that I feel like that, if I'm not saying Lord of the Rings, then it probably does have to be Amadeus, because it meant so much to me, both in terms of my evolution as a cinephile and my love of classical music, and it's just a great movie. Like, I mean, it's just I I always talk about, there's a shot in the movie that really taught me like how powerful cinema can truly be, and it's when have you seen the movie, Jared?
Long ago.
Okay.
I need to rewatch it, and it's gonna be its 40th anniversary this year, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and they
would,
just recently did a 4K restoration of the film, of the original theatrical version of the film, which is even better, because the last time the original version of the movie was released was on DVD back in like 1997. So it's long overdue. But what I was going to say was, there's a shot when Salieri has composed a little march of welcome for Mozart when he first comes to court, and it's presented to Mozart, and Mozart says, "Oh, keep it, Your Majesty. It's already here in my head." And they're all a bit incredulous to that, and he sits down to perform it, but then, like, in the middle of performing it, he's like, "That doesn't really work, does it?" And he basically rewrites it into something far superior. And then there's this camera shot that's a slow push in on Salieri, and he's trying to smile, but he's just like sort of fidgeting and looking from side to side in this really annoyed way. And it's this beautiful, like, combination of like performance, cinematography, music, like everything coming together in just the most perfect way. And that's, I think, when I really realized the power of cinema, that all of those things can work together to create something really magical. So yeah, that's a very important film to me. And I think it's always, I always say my rotating, like, for a long time, my rotating, top couple of movies were, well, ever since Lord of the Rings has come out, that's always been number one. But sort of Braveheart, Amadeus, and Gladiator for a long while were sort of my rotating top three. And then, Pride and Prejudice came along and inserted itself in there somewhere. And now I'm just like, oh, screw orders. I love them all.
Yeah, no, some people have like their unquestioned favorite movie of all time, and sometimes there's a rotating, depending on your mood. And I'm actually in a very similar place in that, like, I would probably say, if you allow me to treat the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a collective unit, that's going to be my number one. But if you make me break it up into an individual film, I'm like, I can't choose. And in that case, I start to vacillate between either Pan's Labyrinth or Alien or The Empire Strikes Back at the top of the
Alien's another one that, like, because I hadn't seen it for years, and what I mean by that is that I just hadn't seen the movie, period, until a certain point. And then, but then it wasn't until I revisited the film when it came out on Blu-ray, I think, and then it started to sort of creep up higher and higher up on my list, and now it's one of those, if not top five, like just right underneath, because it's such a beautiful film, and it's an exception because I typically don't go in much for horror movies. The list of horror movies that I like it's a very low number. The most recent addition to which was The Witch, uh, which a couple of you got me to finally sit down and watch. But Alien is like my top horror film because I just love that creeping dread that that movie exudes, and the fact that what's truly frightening about that movie is that it's the dead quiet of space that is what's so scary, not the monster as chilling a creation as the alien is. It's the quiet of space that's the most scary part of that film, and so I really respond to that kind of stuff rather than jump scares, which a good jump scare can still work on me and be very effective, but usually I'm like, I don't want to just be be scared like that every 5 minutes or whatever. I need something more. um Okay, I'm gonna put this up. Yes, that will shoot to the top of the list if that were to ever happen. But at this point, it's, it's probably not a safe bet to make.
No,
As if it ever was.
she seems happy with her current her current arrangement in life. But
I love when
you
our
know,
friends are.
but
I love
allow John to hope.
I love when our friends are like, "Yeah, but John, she's happily married. You wouldn't want to break up her marriage." And I'm like, as long as it's my fantasy, I can deal with the guilt of that. If it ever enters the realm of reality, then that'll be a different conversation. But I'll also be suffering from a heart attack at that point, also. So, um, yeah, you're right. Guilty. That's the novel is most certainly, it's one book. But you can definitely make an argument that that the films are like separate films, because that's a different story, because that's an adaptation, and they were released as three separate films. But but also you can say the novel, even though it's one novel, it was released in 3 volumes. So you know there's an argument to be made either way. I always say it's one film. um, and like the most joyous experience I've ever had watching anything was when I sat down and did a whole viewing of all 3 films in one day. I don't know if I have the stamina for that anymore. I did that when I was younger.
Yeah, and it is easier to treat it all as one film when it is, one director, one writing team. Yeah, yeah, never say never. And like, for instance, like as opposed to another franchise where they're very clearly distinct entities. Like, collectively, the Star Wars films are my favorite movie franchise ever. But they are all, there are 11 of them spread out over 42 years by all different directors and things. So it's hard to pick just one. And I do think that Empire Strikes Back is the best of the lot. It's one of the few movies that I basically consider flawless. So that's why I have it at the top of the tier. But the Lord of the Rings experience is just collectively so perfect, that individually or collectively they are one of the greatest cinematic achievements ever.
Yeah, and Lord of the Rings is such a unique thing versus any of the Star Wars films, because, of course, you know, for principal photography, they shot, all 3 films, with the exception of, pickups that were done each subsequent year. But so in a lot of ways, it does feel similar to the novel in that respect of, it was filmed as one big project. Um, And yeah, so I always just say, when when I talk about the trilogy, I just say the Lord of the Rings is like one film, but yeah, it's seldom anymore that I can actually manage to watch them that way. But yeah, I like to do a nice, relaxed one disc per day throughout the week. That's comfortable viewing for me. But always the extended cut.
Always.
Yeah.
Although theatricals are great too, it's just that if you have the time, the extended cuts are always.
Yeah, and I do occasionally revisit the theatrical just because, like, I have like sense memory of like seeing each of those films repeatedly in the theater. So in some ways, those original versions do feel like, it's like coming home again. But in terms of getting all that, the character development and the full scope of the story, especially when I'm doing marathon watching of like all three films, then it's got to be the extended cuts.
For sure.
I love how but this is what we talked about this conversation going all over the place, but everything always comes back to Lord of the Rings.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a staple for us. You're repping
And
it.
also,
Yeah. It's your birthday, man. We'll talk about whatever you wanna talk about. Whether you wanna circle back to James Bond and Goldeneye, or if anybody else has any other things we wanna hang out and discuss.
This is great. Keep the questions coming if you have them, guys. I'd love to go off in any direction you guys would want us to go. What else am I watching right now? Shoot. Yeah, everything's X-Men right now because I've been invested in that. What else? I'm getting ready to start watching the Hulu show Shogun, which I've been putting off, but I really want to get into that because it seems like something that's right up my alley. And then so I've been watching X-Men and the Bad Batch, obviously, because we were talking about that. I just rewatched the two-parter from the last two-parter we had for the last couple episodes, but we'll save that for for next week. I don't know. Yeah.
I am actually curious, given the fact that because you're so invested in this X-Men series right now, like with the upcoming they're going to be introducing X-Men into the MCU shortly, but do you, like, given all the turmoil that's been going on and like the way that it looks like they actually are going to like kind of be leaning more into the Fox X-Men for at least the introduction with Deadpool, like how are you feeling about that? Are you wanting them to start to veer more towards the X-Men 97 series, or are you hoping to kind of like let that be its own thing and then kind of let them have a new take on the X-Men?
Well, I think what's going on right now, because it seems like they're content at the moment to sorry, I just noticed our numbers are dropping.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the we can bring it back.
Maybe we should have kept talking about James Bond, but I'm having fun doing this. That's all right. But I kind of like that right now. They're revisiting. It seems like they're bringing in some of the Fox X-Men elements to sort of begin to usher like the X-Men into the MCU, but I still feel like at a later date they're going to introduce their own version of the X-Men. I think what we're in right now is kind of a holding pattern where we're gonna get stuff like, you know, they're gonna use the multiverse, you know, saga that we're in right now to bring in the elements from the Fox movies, and that's fun because I'm a big fan of those movies, and I want to see, you know, I want to revisit those characters and have them maybe even get a proper send off. Um, but I'm also very happy with what they're doing with X-Men '97 because I feel like mm, because I don't think they're going to introduce like the new version of the X-Men for a couple more years.
Mhm.
Because I think they're gonna stay in the sandbox for now of sort of playing with the Fox version of the characters, just to sort of segue into what they're going to do later. So I feel like X-Men '97 is in a great position right now where it can exist on its own for a couple of years
Mhm.
and just be like, this is the version of the X-Men that, you know, is in this TV show that's going to run for a few years,
Mhm.
while we warm up to, to doing, you know, our version in live action. And and I'm fine with that because like this is, you know, I love what they did with the Fox, you know, X-Men movies. You know, they didn't hit everything out of the park, obviously, but there's a lot that I love about those films, and to be honest, they're my favorite Marvel franchise. Um, but but if you ask me like what's my favorite version of the X-Men ever, it is X-Men the animated series. And so if this show is allowed to just kind of exist on its own for a few years while they figure out what they're doing in live action, then I think that's great.
Yeah.
Because that'll kind of it's the best thing in the world for you know a bunch of different audiences because for those of us who grew up loving this show, we get to enjoy that for a few years, you know, having that back in our lives. And also for the people, younger people who are coming to X-Men for the first time, they get the same experience we had of learning to love these characters and get involved in the stories through this medium and through the animated series, and then they'll be primed for when, you know, the eventual MCU live action version
Mhm.
comes along. Um, and also, there's always this sort of oh, bye, Dean.
Bye,
Thank you
Dean.
for stopping in. Um, there's always this tug and pull also between, you know, what how closely do you hew to like classic versions of the characters versus this is a new time that we're in a new era, and you want to, especially for a story like the X-Men which deals with, you know, racism and prejudice and all that stuff, you want to kind of begin to, you don't want to be limited by how they design the characters back when the, you know, the comics started off. But then there's like part of me that's like, yes, but I still want the characters as I remember them from when I was a kid. Well, here you go. X-Men
Yeah.
'97 is a continuation of that thing that I loved. But then the next live action version of X-Men will come along and they're going to change things up.
Yeah.
And um, that's good for both storytelling and also for new audiences coming in so that they feel, because if it's one thing that X-Men should do, it should make people who have felt excluded feel included. That's
Yeah.
the entire point of the story. You know, when you hear about people who grew up on the animated series, they always say, well, I felt like an outsider, and but I watched the show, and you know, and I felt like I was one of the X-Men, and you know, and so yeah, so I think that this is a brilliant way of both giving older fans that more of that thing that they loved when they were younger, but also looking ahead to the future where, where we might see things changed up a bit. There's always been talk about how, you know, Professor Xavier was like just standing for Martin Luther King Jr. And nowadays that looks a little, he's a, white guy, it's not the greatest comparison in the world to make. So maybe, consider that when casting comes along. But again, so it's like you have the best of both worlds. You get to look towards the future and take advantage of that, but also they're still giving us this continuation, of the thing as we loved it, while also making good, like, forward strides within the show, like new characters that they can bring in to kind of level the playing field a bit, and so basically I have no complaints about the way they're doing it. I think it's very smart.
Yeah, no, just again, I've only watched the first episode of 97 so far, but just from that episode alone, like in particular the scene where they're interrogating that Henry Grisich character, I was just
Henry
Gyrich, yeah, I was just like, oh yeah, like this is why this show can and should be airing right now, because this is still every bit as relevant as it is.
It cracked me up because it was referencing the finale of the original series where Gyrich attacked Xavier. What's funny is because that last batch of episodes, the animation suffered tremendously because they started for the last like 11 episodes or something. They did them in-house.
Yep.
And the animation was very subpar in comparison to what the rest of the show had. And so it's funny because in that last episode, Gyrich looks nothing like his character at all. So it was just funny to then go into this show and get back to him looking exactly the way he's supposed to. So yeah, Dan, I think that would be a brilliant casting decision. I think he would be great. It take a bit of getting used to him not being a villain. but but I think that would be great. Yeah, that would be some great casting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to like steal all the X-Men 97 thunder for this stream, especially because I do think we will talk about it at some point. But because Potter put this question to you, that might be a good question to kind of segue back into everything. Who would if you could be in the X-Men, who would it be? And we can debate this two ways. Basically, whose power do you want? Or if you actually have to be that X-Men and like come with all of their baggage, because there are some X-Men that it's just like, oh, their powers are awesome, but do I want to be that particular X-Men? And I jokingly say that, like when I think about like, oh, Nightcrawler, his teleportation, but then I'm like, but Nightcrawler has a particularly tortured history and also looks like a blue devil. I don't know if I necessarily want that.
Oh God, because they're all kind of messed up, aren't they?
Yes, they are. That's why it's a challenging question.
Because as a kid, I would have said Wolverine, right?
Yeah.
But then the actual idea of like claws coming out of you, that sounds cool, but especially in the movies, he's like, it hurts every time. So yeah. I'm like, I don't know if I want that. But that's not even his power, actually. His that was something that was done to him. So I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't be too bad to be Wolverine. I think Mystique would be pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Basically, turn into anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and Morph basically has the similar powers from this show.
Yeah.
But yeah, like one of the things that I realized, like both watching the movies and like, is that you don't necessarily think of it immediately, but given the construction of the world, how like ridiculously overpowered Magneto actually is, like the ability to control all metal, you're like, you can actually get pretty far with that. No wonder he's been such an effective antagonist. Of course, though, of course, at least by the '97 version, like Storm is like classically like the Omega level threat. So.
Yeah, I do love that, and then I love when he comes back with it in Days of Future Past, and he's like he you know kind of rewords it slightly, but he's like, oh, I do remember you now. I'm going to tell you the same thing you told us. Fuck off. Oh God. Yeah, I say like I know those movies have their missteps, but there's some real gems, in that series. So I'm glad that like the MCU hasn't completely abandoned that. I'm glad we're sort of in this phase right now where they're going to to honor that. I'm very happy to be getting Hugh Jackman's Wolverine again, this summer. Even though I was definitely one of the people who was like, no, let Logan be his swan song. But still, yeah, I'm a hypocrite. I'm still looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah, for that iteration of the character, like he, I feel like he got the perfect ending. Like Logan is probably my favorite of the X-Men films done by Fox. But then I because he's clearly playing like a different take on the character, I'm okay with him coming back for Deadpool versus Wolverine, especially because of his, especially because of the whole multiversal component of it. But we'll see how.
Also, I'm most interested to see like how much Deadpool's like breaking the fourth wall like goes over to Logan, and like is Wolverine going to be aware of the fact that he's also Hugh Jackman? I would be very interested if that were the case.
Yeah.
But just the fact that he's going to be in the yellow and blue, like that's enough right there to be like, okay, we did need this at least one time. So, God. But yeah, I feel like we've talked ourselves into a corner.
Maybe we can bring it back to James Bond a little bit, just to kind of like bookend everything. Do you, from this particular movie, Goldeneye, do you have like a favorite just quip or one-liner that just every time you watch the movie you're like, yep, that's it, that's the line?
I am to bring it back to my blushing. I am quite fond of when James gets the better of Xenia after she's been, screaming yes, and he's like, no, no, no. Just get a chuckle out of that. But I also, oh God, I do also really love it's the stuff between him and Q. Really, it's the I always said the pen was mightier than the sword. Thanks to me, they were right.
Yeah. That
yeah, she always did enjoy a tight squeeze. Yeah.
Indeed.
Favorite Bond actor. See, this is tough for me because based on everything I've been saying thus far, you'd think okay, very easily it's I would say Pierce Brosnan, but I feel like it's tough because I always feel like I just default back to Sean Connery because I don't think that anybody can top Sean Connery as Bond. He's, but then I'm like, oh, but I love what Pierce brought to it, just because he does seem to, it's that great balance between, he's that, he's allowed to be a little silly and within that suave kind of way that's not overdoing it the way that Roger Moore tended to do it. And that's not any shading as Roger Moore. Roger Moore is my dad's favorite Bond, and I'm actually quite a fan. I don't know if anybody will even remember this movie. This is this is obscure if you're not a Jean-Claude Van Damme fan, but he directed a film called The Quest, which was basically Bloodsport by another name. And Roger Moore was in that, and I quite enjoyed him in that film. But yeah, and I think all the Bonds have their qualities, but I just don't think you can beat Sean Connery at the end of the day. He's like, he's like the archetypal, James Bond. But I guess that would go on, I'd name him as the best Bond. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's I would agree that Sean Connery as the OG James Bond would be top my list as well. It's just the legacy that he has is like informed every subsequent Bond. I do think that the Daniel Craig movies are probably my favorite Bond movies, and that he's great as the Bond in them. But Connery is just like more classically the character, and as I alluded to earlier, Pierce Brosnan is kind of like who I like think about when I think James Bond. Like that is what James Bond kind of like looks like. But that's just because that was the first Bond I ever saw was in the 90s. So he's, but Timothy Dalton, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, they all have their excellent charms. They all have their ups and downs with the roles and the movies. And yeah, I would say that as a collective whole, it's cool that this franchise has just gone through so many of those iterations.
Yeah, I feel kind of, maybe it sounds like I'm shading Daniel Craig a bit by not mentioning him, because I think that he did something that like none of the other actors really got to do, because he was playing such a they went so deep into Bond as a character and as a person, and like going into his trauma and stuff like that. And it's just stuff that none of the other Bonds got to do, because it was just a very different take on the character. But again, it's like, it's what did you grow up on? And so I came to Bond first with Pierce Brosnan, and then immediately went back to all the past Bond films, starting with the Sean Connery movies. So like those two for me are always going to be like what I think of as like the classic James Bond.
Yeah. What if I could ask, like, what for each of the Bonds, like, do you have a favorite from each era? Like, which favorite movie of each of the Bonds?
Okay, so I'll start with Pierce Brosnan, because that was the first. It's Goldeneye, as I think we've discussed so far on here. For Connery, predictable answer, but yeah, Goldfinger. It's and I'm trying to remember for Roger Moore. It's been a long time since I've seen any of the Roger Moore films.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. But I feel like, I don't know, because like I'm going off of like memories rather than actual film quality. So I don't know. I'm going to abstain from that one. I would need to, because I don't really remember what
Yeah.
You know, specifically any of the films. I just remember vaguely stuff like Christopher Lee was the man with the golden gun, and
Yeah.
that Grace Jones was in one of them. And yeah, my memories are kind of hazy. But and for Daniel Craig, Casino Royale.
Okay. What about Timothy Dalton? Just because with Lazenby it's only the one, and Dalton only has two. I don't know if you.
I God, I feel guilty about this. I think I've only seen License to Kill.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a couple blind spots in my Bond filmography that I should be very ashamed about. And the other one is, you know, you just mentioned it. I actually haven't seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is shameful. But I actually, oh my God, I'm gonna get into some stuff here. I think the only reason I've actually seen License to Kill is not because of Timothy Dalton. It's because one of the Bond girls was played by Talisa Soto, who was Kitana in Mortal Kombat, and that's why I wanted to watch it. Yeah, make of that what you will. So. Yeah, no, it's when those films get hopefully released on 4K at some point, I will definitely be going back through and watching, you know, each film, you know, one by one, because it's been a while for some of them.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, as I said, I've got blind spots in my Bond filmography as well. But I do feel like, you know, I've seen enough of them to have like a good flavor of each of the eras. So for me, I would probably just rattle it off. For Connery, it's close between From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. I'd probably give the edge to Goldfinger. Lazenby, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I just really love that one. For the Moore era, I would probably go with The Spy Who Loved Me. Although I do enjoy The Man with the Golden Gun because of the Christopher Lee performance, you know, as the Bond villain there. For Dalton, it would be probably License to Kill, although The Living Daylights, I actually enjoy that one as well. For Brosnan, it's Goldeneye. And then for Craig, it's Casino Royale. That's my favorite Bond movie overall, although I really enjoy all of them. I love No Time to Die. I love Skyfall. I didn't like Spectre on my first watch, but then I rewatched it before No Time to Die. I'm like, this is actually much better than I remember it being, and part of it was
I feel like a lot of people were really hard on Spectre, but I actually enjoyed it. Yeah, it's not perfect, but I don't think it like, but I felt like it was a really good like follow up to Skyfall, and there were a lot of elements of it that I loved, and like if I think one of the best parts of the last two Bond films was Leia Sudol.
Oh yeah, no.
In both Spectre and No Time to Die, she was just amazing.
Yeah, no, actually, that's one of the reasons that I love No Time to Die so much is like, because I really liked her Madeline Swan in Spectre, but when they brought her back and made her like the emotional centerpiece of No Time to Die, like that elevated both movies for me, and I thought that she was exceptional in that film. So.
Yeah, I was really nervous when they brought her back for the last one. I was like, oh God, they're gonna kill her off, aren't they? And little did I know, nope, not killing her off. Yeah, I will say one of the funnest parts of No Time to Die is the whole section with oh God, why am I blanking? Sorry, When I end up doing these streams, I always end up blanking on names, even ones that okay, Anna de Armas.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole section with her, and she's just so funny. Yeah, in that light, if there's one issue of, like, one of the issues I have with the movie is that she's just not in more of it. But that there, I know there's not really room for her elsewhere in the movie because it's just so so much of it is just focused on James and Madeline. But yeah, I hope they find a way to. I hope they bring her back in for future movies, or hell, give her her own spinoff. She was great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she came in for one scene, she kicked ass, and then she left. But she would be a welcome comeback.
And what I love is, like, she was not the slightest bit interested in James at all.
Yeah,
which I thought was great.
Yeah, and then
like all of his little flirtations were just completely like went right by her.
and he respected it. By the end, he was just like, "You were excellent. Thank you for your service." Yeah. And I got a special kick out of her being in the movie, especially after the two of them had just started Knives Out together, and now here they were jumping over to Craig's franchise, and she's just gonna pop in and steal the scene.
And both so totally different from their characters in Knives Out. It's God. Oh, you and I could just totally go into having this be, make a second act of this stream and just have it be a Knives Out discussion.
Well, I know I know that's on our long list of possible movies to discuss one day, and I know other people would love to talk about that as well. So we'll save it as a little teaser, but yeah, it's delightful. And as Wheezy Squeezebox points out, when you do get around to watching Her Majesty's Secret Service, Dame Diana Rigg is one of the best Bond girls ever, and it is also notable, like, she is the one Bond girl that Bond actually marries, and then it doesn't go great because the movie ends in tragedy. So, but it's a great performance.
Well, and that was one of the. See, and that's one of the gripes I have with No Time to Die is, like, they robbed Bond of his happy ending of, like, going off into the sunset with Madeline that we got at the end of Spectre. But yeah, that's always got to be a tragedy for James.
Never happy life for him. But yeah, just to lighten it up in terms of, like, more fun stuff, I did want to shout out one little moment of darkness that I actually find, like, really funny in this movie in Goldeneye is there's the whole bit where Trevelyan's super mad at Bond because he set the timer for 3 minutes instead of 6 minutes, and then he couldn't escape his fake death, and that's why he has the scar on his face. And when when Trevelyan and locks Natalya and Bond in the train and escapes, and he gives the classic sinister Bond speech where he's like, "Good luck with the floor, James. I've set the timers for 6 minutes. The same 6 minutes you gave me. It was the least I could do for a friend." And Natalya's like, "What does that mean?" And James is like, "We've got 3 minutes." I just thought that was, like, in a movie that is very, like, can be on the nose with its humor. I thought that was very much a clever little, like, wry callback that I really appreciated.
That whole sequence has so many great back and forths between James and Alec. Just I love when after the train is first of all, when the train is getting ready to crash, and the glee with which Xenia says he's going to dinner ALS. She's so excited about it. As she is with most things. But then once the train crashes and Trevelyan wakes up, he instantly, like, you know, races for the gun, and of course James steps on the gun, and I just love the way he says, "Why can't you just be a good boy and die?" And then it's you first, you second. Oh God, it's so great. That's the kind of serious stuff that these movies don't tackle.
Yeah, as I believe, the Craig movie, in the Craig movies, he actually does end up having a child with Madeline. I don't remember if they ever get into it at any other point. I suspect not.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's a line in this movie that later on when Trevelyan is talking about, you know, all the vodka martinis, silence, streams of the men you killed, or all the arms, of those willing women for the ones you failed to protect. Yeah, and no, like, I mentioned it earlier with the music, but talking about the train sequence, but what comes before that with the tank ride through St. Petersburg is just like one of the all-time great, Bond sequences ever. And like I said, that's where they unleash the classic James Bond music there. And I just love that Oromov is just the back of the vehicle just chugging back the alcohol, and he's like, "Go left."
That sequence is, as you said, like one of the times when it's just like Bond is like, it's not going to concern itself with the realism or the implications of what does this all mean. It's like James Bond's going to drive a freaking tank through the streets of this Russian city, and he's gonna get away with it. and I do love that the entire time he is like, he's just fully in control, and everyone is, and it's the bad guys who are actually in the car, although Natalya's there as a prisoner as well, and Oromov is just, becoming slowly more and more and more unhinged throughout the entire sequence.
Oh, I love them when he gets back on the train with Trevelyan, and Trevelyan is like, Bond is alive, and he just sort of half chuckles. He's like, he escaped. And it's like, that's good for Bond, bad for you. Oh, and that's one of the great things. Like, the villains in this movie, they sound like villains, just with their line deliveries and everything. It's, oh God, it's so good. Yeah, just kind of summing it up. This, as we've been talking about this, just, it's still my, like, putting aside conversations about what the best Bond film is, like, this is still my favorite, just because it's the first one I ever saw, and I don't think you can beat that experience of seeing Bond for the first time, and going from that kid who was like scoffing at Bond actually, riding off a cliff, flying down to an airplane only to get it to like curve upward at the very last second, like, to then being completely enraptured by everything he was watching. It's and everything we talked about with the video game and all that stuff. It was a cultural moment, this movie, and so I don't think for me anything will ever beat it, even if, like, objectively I can say that, so this film maybe had a stronger, like, emotional story or what have you. It's just there's something that the mixture is so great in this movie of like between having a serious story, in sort of the betrayal of 006
Yeah.
and all that stuff, but also winking at the audience and still having fun, uh, in a way that's like that was a balance that I don't think the Bronson films ever recaptured. I have a lot of love for Tomorrow Never Dies, but it definitely leans more heavily into the like the campiness, you know, and but it does it to great effect. But it's just they never really recaptured that, having the sort of serious element that this movie has.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I would agree. And even though we've talked a lot about like how, fun and campy this series can be, and that's part of its charm. It's a feature, not a bug. This movie does actually have a real emotional through line to it that allows it to feel like the weight of it, and that the fact it's the characters of Bond and Trevelyan, the bond that they shared, and then the sense of actual deep betrayal that James feels when Trevelyan is revealed as that he not only faked his death, but that he's now the head of this massive criminal organization and holds such this deep grudge against MI6 and everything that Bond stands for, and the whole refrain back and forth of like for England, James, like it gets repeated multiple times, but each time there actually is weight behind it. It doesn't just become a punchline. And that's why at the very end, or almost at the very end, when they have their final confrontation and Trevelyan is dangling above the satellite dish and he finally throws it one more time back in Bond's face for England, James. And Bond's like, no, for me, and lets him fall. It actually does have like a real wall up, and that's why it's like become one of the more famous lines from this era of Bond, because you feel it for these two characters. Like you get the sense that they have been through hell together, but even though their paths were joined for a time, they wound up as adversaries, and it had to end in one of their deaths.
Yeah, I'm gonna put this up real quick because speaking of Roger Moore films, the one movie of his that I have watched a bit of in recent times was Live and Let Die, which boy, that is not a movie that aged well. Um, and that's all we'll say. But I will say the character, Solitaire, the Bond girl in that movie is played by the young Jane Seymour, and holy crap, was she was absolutely stunning in that film. And is definitely the reason to go back and watch it, even if there's some very uh, disturbing story elements in that particular Bond outing. But no, yeah, she's great. Um, uh, and yeah, no, I do want to see more, rewatch some more of Roger Moore's films because it's been a while. But yeah, no, Stephanie, yeah, the song is the song is good, but it's just the optics of the story in that film are not good at all. Um, but and even when you're like, oh, let's put ourselves back in the era in which it was made, even then it's like, ugh. But still, like I said, when the movies come out in 4K, I'll still be rewatching all of them, that one included. So,
Although that actually does raise a question, like, do you have a favorite of the Bond themes that just comes to mind like immediately?
oh, I actually am really fond of Tina Turner's song in this movie,
Yeah.
Goldeneye, and it's one of my favorite opening, like, opening sequences, opening credit sequences in the films. But I have to say Skyfall is one for the ages.
Yeah.
I feel like I have to give it to Skyfall because even though they started to move away from the traditional Bond sound in the score for that film. But the song is like pure James Bond.
Yeah. I would agree. Like Skyfall, like, it may be one of our more recent Bond outings, but like from the moment you heard it, you're just like, that's it. That's a classic, instant classic right there. And I like a lot of the more modern Bond themes. I like the one from Casino Royale, You Know My Name. I like No Time to Die. But if I'm going to go for a classic Bond theme, I kind of think for me, it's always Diamonds Are Forever. That just has such a catchy refrain to it. But
I'm gonna go for classic Bond songs. I am going to go, and this won't be for the obvious reason. It'll be Goldfinger, and a big part of that is it's one of my favorite episodes of the show Frasier. It's when the Frasier, Niles, and Martin are like, I forget what was going on in that episode, but all three of them have like been through it for the episode, and and Martin wants to cheer them up, and so they're like out at a bar or something, and he sees like that there's this guy playing the piano, and he's like, come on guys, come over here, we're gonna sing a song. And it's like and he says to the piano player, do you know any songs? He's like, I really only know a couple. And then he says one, he says, or Goldfinger, and Martin's like, yeah, Goldfinger, we'll do that. And it's just the three of them standing there, waiting as the piano player goes dun dun dun, and then the three of them just going Goldfinger. It's just the funniest thing. And so I will never forget that, and so I always think very fondly of that song for that reason. And like I said, for me, Goldfinger is like the sort of quintessential James Bond film, and so everything about it, from the song to the characters, I mean, that's the one with Odd Job, and and the Bond girl is named Pussy Galore. I mean,
and for as much much as we ragged on the ridiculousness of Xenia Onatopp, like nothing's ever topping that one. So.
Oh God, yeah. Xenia Onatopp is restrained in comparison. Oh God, oh memories. Yeah. Oh God, I just love these films. I really do. That's why I'm glad that we, sort of covered, we had some digressions and other stuff like X-Men and all that, but I'm glad that we also did like cover the range of different James Bond movies and have a wider conversation, because like I think the thing to hammer home for me is that this is just one of those film series that, it's one of the things that has brought me the most joy throughout my life, because the great thing about it is it's always been constant. Sometimes there's been a gap, between films, but the James Bond series has been something that's been ongoing, and it's ever evolving, always changing. So, and the good thing is, if you don't like one iteration of it, you still have a large library of, a back catalog of, of classic films to go back and watch. And I feel like there is a Bond for everybody. Unless you just don't like James Bond at all, which I know is the case for some people, but
Yeah. Well,
I can't help those people.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that we chose this movie for today with when celebrating your birthday, where it allowed us not to be maybe not like as quite as rigorously delve into the intricacies of the themes and just have a little bit more fun with it, because I think that that's the way this series is best appreciated. So
Yeah,
even though there were some truly great movies in the series, like we also like. Sometimes you just want to go, on a drive in the Aston Martin with your favorite 007, and perhaps not, perhaps not get into complete disaster of a crash as we did, because we didn't even talk about the opening sequence of the movie where Bond basically drives his evaluator crazy, and then of course it all works out.
well, and I could have, like, if we were talking about like going through this and talked about like intricacies of like character and plot progression and stuff like that, I could have talked about like the fact that how genius I think it actually is that the movie introduces Xenia in such a playful way, and so that you're actually caught off guard and wait, this is a threatening person. And yeah, but I love that whole opening sequence. Just those poor bike riders.
that is one of the best jokes in the entire movie.
Yeah.
Ladies
first. And then of course, like it's such a, like, again, talking about sort of the classic Bond where M has sent this this young woman to analyze Bond, and I do love his line. Here we are having a pleasant drive out into the country, and you've got to bring psychology into it.
Very meta. Very
yeah. Yeah. So it's it's one of those movies that I think we could have dug deeper into, but I also think that this it was a good fit for today, because just kind of having fun. And plus, but I will say that, like, if you want to like dive really deep into a Bond movie, that's kind of what the Daniel Craig movies are sitting there for. It's like those are very rich with, like, going into talking about character and all that. But I will say, when our friends at Force Center decided to start covering the Bond movies, and they said they were gonna do the Daniel Craig films, part of me was like, you cowards, start with classic Bond.
Well, I mean, like, we know that Joseph Scrimshaw is a big Bond aficionado.
I know.
And Ken absolutely is more interested in like the modern Craig era, but I haven't fully gotten, they just started up their series, but like I loved their discussion on Casino Royale, and that is one that is like very much suited to the kind of work that they do.
I was just joking around because it's because we both know the depth with which they explore things that are their topics of discussion. So I just think it would be really interesting to hear them analyzing classic Bond. But yeah, no. So I guess that's it. I mean, we're coming up on 3 hours. I mean, I could bring up other topics, and we could go for another hour, but I think we'll just go ahead and stop there. So unless anybody has some questions they want to rattle off before we sign off. Okay, favorite Bond gadget. Yeah, we'll finish off with this. Well, I kind of said it earlier, didn't I? It's got to be the exploding pen, because it created in me this tendency that's followed me all my life, where anytime I'm holding a pen, I've got to do the twirling motion and the 3 clicks. I don't know. What about you, Jared?
Is it cheating to just say the Aston Martin? I think it might be, because it features multiple, gadgets, and it's Bond's vehicle of choice. But if it's not, then that. But if it otherwise, I would say that just something along the lines of oh God, what's that thing that's from? Oh shoot, my mind's going blank. But yeah, the exploding pen is just such a delightful idea, and and the payoff in this movie is great, because the whole click it 3 times, and then it goes, and then you can click it 3 times again to disarm it, and he keeps doing it and keeps doing it and keeps doing it, and you're just finally Bond just loses his patience and just knocks it out of his hands. So it's great. But yeah, I'll have to go with that on the line. Although I also do love the joke in this movie where where he's showing him the belt that has the repelling cable, and then Bond's like, "I'm familiar with that device," and then Q's like, "Not this one, you're not."
And my favorite thing about Q is every time, he always said, "And this I'm particularly proud of." Oh God. Yeah, I will say, the whole thing, it got a little worrisome when I was younger and I was doing it, because I did start to notice when I do it when I was in school, after I did the initial 3 clicks, I couldn't not do the follow-up 3 clicks. If I didn't disarm the bomb, it would bug me, and I'd be like, I know it's not actually going to explode, but I can't not disarm it. Oh God, OCD, John, even from a young age. Yeah. So anyway, to recap, next week we're going to be doing our mid-season, however that's not quite mid-season, but 2 or 3/4 season discussion of Star Wars: The Bad Batch. And then the week after that, we'll be talking about, it'll be the return of a Knights of Kira stream. We'll be talking about Atonement. And then the week after that will be Pan's Labyrinth. So looking forward to all of that. We got a really good couple of weeks coming up. Yeah. And just want to, obviously it is my birthday, but also happy Easter to everybody.
Happy Easter.
My dad did piss me off a little bit, because I woke up this morning and first thing he said to me was "Happy Easter." I'm like, really?
I think he
was just messing with me.
Yeah.
But seriously, thank you everybody who tuned in tonight. I love you guys, and just it makes me feel really happy that you guys were here to help me ring in 40. Wow, I keep saying that, it doesn't make it better. But it made it a little bit better just hanging out with all of you. So thank you, and hope you guys will come back next week. Even if you don't watch Star Wars: The Bad Batch, maybe our conversation will talk you into giving it a shot. Aside from that, I guess that's it. Anything you want to say before we sign off, Jared?
Nope, just happy birthday, man. I'm glad we got to be a part of your special day, and I'm very proud of you for not going on and on and on and on and on about how just how like the passage of time on this earth, even though I gave you free reign to do so. But I, you know, you would, you know, I just hope you do appreciate that, like, you know, 40 years old, it's a big number, but you're still going very strong, and and we're all happy to be here for you. So.
Yep. Yep. Okay. All right. Love you all, and thanks for hanging with us. And this went good. I wondered how we were going to balance just goofing around and actually talking about the movie, and I think we did a good job. We had fun, and it was more laid back, and we even had time for some X-Men and Lord of the Rings discussion too. So I think we had a good time. Sorry, guys. I actually don't want to say goodbye. I'm really enjoying hanging with you guys. But but we'll see you next week. And hope you guys all have a wonderful night. All right. Bye.
Take care.